The rain had begun hours before sunrise, a soft percussion on the Spanish tile roof that ran in gentle rivulets down the Graceland gutters and over the empty drive. Somewhere beyond the fenced lawn, June cicadas rasped half-heartedly, stunned by the coolness that drifted off the storm clouds. Inside, the upstairs hallway smelled of shampoo and cedar chests, and something sweeter, the lingering vanilla of last night's cookies, half-eaten in the kitchen and forgotten. Lisa Marie Presley opened her eyes to that sound. Rain folding over itself, steady as a lullaby she couldn't remember. Her small pink clock glowed 5:26 a.m. The nightlight's bulb had burned out, so the room hung between blue shadow and faint flash whenever lightning grazed the curtains. Her pillow was damp, though she didn't know whether from tears or the humidity sneaking through the window frame. She sat up, brushed hair from her cheeks, and felt the crumpled sheet still clutched in her palm. A drawing she'd made in the music room before supper, lines already smudged by sleep-sweaty fingers. Bare feet sank into the shag as she padded to the door. The mansion felt vaster in the dark, every hallway a tunnel, every chandelier a waiting constellation. She passed the tall white cabinet where her mother's photographs stood in silver frames, and tiptoed toward the double doors of her father's bedroom. A thin beam of amber leaked from the crack beneath, pulsing in time with tape-reel static, and a voice she recognized even in whispers, her father harmonizing with himself on "How Great Thou Art," an earlier take he'd begun to distrust, because the high G in the third verse never felt earnest enough. The reel looped, rewound, played again. Lisa rested her forehead against the cool wood. The song ended, then started over. She knocked once, so lightly she wondered if it made a sound. Inside, the music cut off. A hinge sighed. The door opened. Elvis sat on the edge of the bed, wearing a loose cotton robe, hair flattened at the crown, eyes dark as the patches beneath them. A small reel-to-reel player crouched on the nightstand, its spools unmoving now. The brass lamp beside it illuminated a desk Bible whose spine had cracked from overuse. His expression softened when he saw her, though something glassy, fragile, lingered behind the smile. She lifted the bent drawing. In wax crayon yellows and chalky whites she'd sketched a tall figure, his hair unmistakable, but his body seemed woven from light instead of skin. A thin halo arced above him. Lightning flickered, giving the paper a startled glow. "Couldn't sleep, Button?" he asked, voice low, the Memphis lilt gentled by fatigue. She climbed into his lap without answering, tucking her head under his chin the way she did when thunder made the windows rattle. Her fingertips found the silk cord of his robe and twisted it, the drawing pressed to her chest like a bandage. "I had a dream," she murmured. "You were there, but you weren't really you. You were shining, like when the sun hits the swimming pool water. But you looked scared. Then it got so bright I couldn't see you anymore. You were gone." Elvis ran a thumb over her shoulder blade in small circles, the gesture automatic, yet his gaze drifted beyond the far wall as though searching for something only he could name. He exhaled, slow, measured, the way the vocal coach once taught him to calm racing lungs before a high note. "What else did you hear, honey?" She pulled back, eyes wide, lashes still damp. A voice. It wasn't loud, but I heard it. It said, "If he sings again tomorrow, he'll be taken away." Her bottom lip quivered. "Daddy, please don't go to Nashville. Don't let them take you." For a heartbeat, the house seemed to tilt. Rain battered the windows harder. Or maybe his breath simply hitched. He swallowed. The recent months had left their fingerprints on him. Vegas residue, divorce papers, pills to blur the spikes in his heart rate. But nothing pressed quite like the pleading in his daughter's voice. He glanced at the suitcase half-packed near the closet, the stack of acetate demos he'd promised to polish with the Nashville band. And suddenly, the room felt crowded with ghosts of intentions. He forced a grin, the showman's reflex, but the corners of his mouth barely moved. "Sweetheart, dreams can feel real, but they're only pictures our minds paint while we're sleeping." She studied him, unconvinced. "I painted this while I was awake," she said, unfolding the paper between them. He noticed a second shape behind the glowing figure. Shadowy, unfinished, charcoal smears forming what could be shoulders, maybe a cloak. He hadn't seen that detail last night when he'd pinned her drawing to the fridge. A cold whisper ran along his spine. He kissed the top of her head. "Tell you what, I'll stay with you until the sun comes up. Then we'll have French toast. We'll talk about Nashville later, okay?" "Promise?" she asked. "Cross my heart." He traced an invisible X over his chest. She leaned against him, eyelids fluttering. Together they listened to the rain orchestrate its unhurried cadence on the roof. The reel-to-reel remained silent. Yet even as he laid her back in her own bed moments later, smoothing the blanket to her chin, Elvis felt the prophecy of her words linger like incense. In the hallway, he paused beneath the portrait of his own mother, fingers brushing the frame. The house lights were off, but faint dawn seeped through stained glass transoms, painting the floor in bruised blues and purples. He tightened his robe, headed for the kitchen, and fetched the well-worn Bible from the bedstand on his way. Isaiah 43 opened willingly beneath his thumbs. "Fear not, for I have redeemed thee. I have called thee by thy name." The letters seemed to tilt, alive, breathing. Outside, thunder rolled south toward the river. When he closed the book, his hands were trembling. He folded Lisa's drawing and tucked it into the inside pocket of his robe, against his heart, where the paper warmed almost instantly. Nashville was only a flight away, but in that hour before sunrise, with rain washing Beale Street clean, the distance felt biblical. The first edge of daylight slipped through the kitchen blinds like a pale razor, cutting the dark into fragile slivers. Elvis set the Bible on the chrome dinette table, its thin pages quivering in the draft each time thunder sighed beyond the hall. He poured coffee from the percolator, but the flavor was off. Too bitter, metallic. He added sugar and tasted again. Still wrong. The shake in his hands turned the spoon into a tiny metronome tapping porcelain. He drew the folded picture from his robe and smoothed it flat beside the cup. In the lamplight, the graphite lines behind his own haloed outline stood out darker than before. An unfinished silhouette, inked in hurried strokes that bled across the page like bruises. Shoulders hunched, head tilted forward. No face. Lisa hadn't spoken of it. Last night he'd skimmed the drawing, charmed by her innocent glow-around daddy fantasy. Now the black smudge felt deliberate, imposed, almost adult in its menace. He tried to laugh at himself. 50 million records sold, and here he was spooked by a child's sketch. But the sound came out thin, stranded halfway to the throat. "Fear not, for I have redeemed thee." The verse echoed, but reassurance didn't follow. He reached for a pencil from the catch-all drawer and, without meaning to, traced the silhouette, testing its borders the way a doctor probes a hidden wound. His knuckles whitened. The lead snapped. In the hallway, the grandfather clock chimed 6. He heard light footsteps overhead, housekeepers starting early, then the hush of doors closing. Graceland was waking, but he felt outside its rhythm, like a stranger who had let himself in after hours. He rose, tucked the picture back into the Bible, and carried both to the music room. Shadows of gilt chandeliers trembled across the ceiling as he flipped on a single sconce. The white Steinway waited under a canvas cover, He peeled it off and pressed a chord, soft, to see if the house would protest. Only the low C replied, resonant and solemn. He played the first bars of "It Is No Secret," voice just above a whisper. Mid-phrase his breath snagged, and what escaped was not melody, but a question shaping itself without words. What if she's right? For months he'd fought a growing sense that applause no longer reached him, that the last encore of the night ended in silence, no matter how many bodies stood cheering. Now, a 5-year-old had named the dread. Rain slowed. Weak gold bled along the high windows. He closed the piano lid, returned to the hall, and ascended the stairs. Outside Lisa's door he paused. The handle was cool, brass blurred by tiny fingerprints. He listened, steady breathing, a child's sigh as she rolled toward the wall. He almost entered, almost woke her to say Nashville could wait. But the chorus of responsibility returned. The session, the players hired, the label nudging, the calendar full of cities whose arenas felt more like obligations than stages. He dressed in silence, black slacks, a loose turtleneck, no rhinestones, no cape. In the mirror, the eyes looking back were older than his 38 years, ringed with insomnia's ink. He pressed the folded drawing into his breast pocket, close enough that the edge brushed skin. Downstairs, the house staff offered breakfast. He waved them off with a tired smile. Instead, he brewed fresh coffee, poured a glass of milk for Lisa, and carried both upstairs as the sun finally broke free of the clouds, firing amber stripes across the stair carpet. She was awake, sitting cross-legged at the foot of her bed, hair tousled in static charged wisps, pajama sleeves hiding her hands. The second drawing lay in her lap, a new scene, half-colored, crayons abandoned mid-stroke. She looked up before he spoke. "Morning, Button," he said, forcing cheer he didn't feel. "Brought you a little something." She accepted the milk, but kept her gaze on him, solemn. "Did you read your Bible?" "Sure did." He settled beside her, mattress sighing. "And I looked at your picture again." "The shiny one?" He nodded. "There's something in it I missed last night. That little person behind me. Who's he supposed to be?" Lisa's brows knit. She sipped, considering. "I don't know." She set the glass on the nightstand, swung tiny legs against the quilt. "When I drew it, I thought maybe it was somebody who didn't want you to hear God. Like in Sunday school, when they talk about the whisper getting buried by noise." Elvis felt the air leave his lungs, slow and cold. Somebody who didn't want you to hear God. The phrasing sliced deeper than any critic's review ever had. He pictured the casino lights, the standing ovations that felt hollow, the pills the doctor swore were safe. Noise, all of it. Maybe the silhouette wasn't a demon. Maybe it was the blur of his own choices standing guard over the microphone. He smiled, but his voice cracked. "Well, I hear him just fine this morning, thanks to you. Are you still going to Nashville?" The question landed like a verdict. He swallowed. "The band's expecting me, honey. But I'll be careful." She reached for his pocket, fingers brushing the folded paper through fabric. "Take it with you, so you remember." He covered her hand with his, warm, steady now. "I will. And I'll call tonight, before your bedtime story." Lisa nodded, satisfied for the moment. She turned the new drawing so he could see. The same glowing figure, him, but now beside it stood another shape in white, hand extended, blocking the dark silhouette behind. The crayon lines wavered, yet they radiated a simple certainty, protection rendered in primary colors. He kissed her forehead, lingered in the doorway, then forced himself down the hall. Outside, The driveway glimmered wet beneath clearing skies. The limousine idled, trunk packed. As he stepped into the morning, birds tested tentative trills in rain-washed magnolias, and somewhere at the threshold of hearing, the thunder seemed to mutter a final warning or benediction. He couldn't tell which. The Nashville flight was an hour away. In his jacket, the fragile paper rustled, a heartbeat not his own, reminding him that some songs begin long before an audience hears the first note, and that the hardest ones to finish aren't always meant for the stage. Rain washed clean from the Memphis sky trailed the jet all the way to Nashville, but the cabin never lost its chill. Elvis kept one hand inside his jacket the entire flight, thumb grazing the folded paper like a talisman. He thought of Lisa's second drawing, the small white figure shielding him, yet every time he shut his eyes, the dark silhouette from the first sketch loomed larger, as though it had stowed away in the luggage hold with the jumpsuits he hadn't bothered to pack. The limousine met him at the runway and covered the 12 miles to Municipal Auditorium in silence, radio off by request. The city smelled of wet asphalt and distant barbecue pits, comforting if he'd been in another mind. Today, it felt oddly theatrical, like a set someone had constructed for a scene he wasn't sure he wanted to play. When the car stopped, Joe Esposito was already on the loading ramp, clipboard in hand, grin in place. But the grin slipped when Elvis stepped into view. No cape, no high-collar suit, just black slacks and a turtleneck that swallowed his voice if he turned too quickly. "You all right, E?" Joe asked under his breath, while the driver unloaded garment bags they wouldn't need. Elvis rubbed a temple. "Slept crooked is all. Let's get through the lines." Inside, the orchestra tuned in restless fragments, horns barking scales, strings flicking pizzicato to settle pitch, the rhythm section running a 4-bar blues until someone barked for quiet. Elvis climbed the stage stairs alone, the big room empty save for ushers taping seat numbers and a lone janitor polishing railings. The hall smelled of varnish and disinfectant, a sterile arena waiting to be filled with sweat, perfume, and expectation. Glenn D. Harden played the opening chords to "It's Midnight" so the sound crew could balance levels. Elvis adjusted the mic stand, cleared his throat, and sang the first phrase. 3 bars in, he stopped. Not a stumble. An absolute halt, as if the lyric had evaporated mid-air. He knew the words. He'd written most of them on hotel stationery at 4 in the morning months earlier, yet the second line refused to surface. He stared into the darkness where rows of empty seats climbed toward the rafters and saw nothing but Lisa's eyes at dawn. Glenn tried again. Same keys, softer. Elvis raised a palm. "Hold up." His voice carried thinly through the monitors. Murmurs rippled among the brass section. Reggie Young lowered his guitar, concern etching his brow. Mechanically, Elvis lifted the mic to his lips. "Y'all ever had a little girl tell you God's trying to get your attention?" The question hung over the house lights like an unsettled spirit. Somebody in the balcony, a rigging tech probably, snorted laughter. A few crewmen chuckled, uneasy. Elvis did not. He returned the mic to its stand, turned away, and left the stage without another word, boots thudding on plywood. Joe caught up halfway to the dressing rooms. "E, you're spooking the band. What's going on?" Elvis opened his hand, showing the crumpled drawing. "Just listen to the kid, Joe. She's 5 and she sees more than any of us." He entered the dressing suite, a converted conference room smelling of new paint and stale cologne, and shut the door. The bulb above the mirror buzzed, casting a jaundiced sheen on the tired man reflected there. He laid the paper flat on the upright piano, smoothing creases like dressing a wound. The dark figure seemed darker here, ink bleeding deeper under fluorescent glare. The protective angel Lisa had added to the second drawing waited in his suitcase, but he couldn't fish it out. Touching hope felt dangerous, while dread still breathed. He tried vocal scales to loosen his throat. Nothing above a B-flat sat right. He sipped honeyed tea. It tasted like dust. Outside the door, Joe talked with Colonel Parker by telephone. Words like ticket refunds and insurance clauses sifting through the wood. Elvis tuned them out and opened the Bible again, letting pages fall where they would. I have called thee by thy name. Thou art mine. Thunder rumbled faintly, though the radar said the storm had passed. Showtime arrived with mechanical punctuality. Joe helped him into a matte black jumpsuit. No rhinestones, just satin piping that swallowed light. Elvis stared at the empty collar studs where rhinestones usually flashed. He felt anonymous, which might have been easier if anonymity were what people had paid to see. 47 minutes tops, Joe promised, adjusting the belt. We'll fly back tonight. You can kiss Lisa goodnight like you said. Elvis nodded, but felt none of the usual surge the edge dancers described before leaping. There was only a cavernous calm, like the hush before an altar call. The announcer barked into the dark. Spotlights split the gloom. Applause rocked the room as Elvis strode out, 3 steps behind the orchestra's opening blast. The crowd's roar should have wrapped him in fire. Instead, it rolled over and receded like surf retreating from an unmovable rock. They hit the first numbers. C. Rider, Steamroller, Love Me. Tight, efficient, professional. Each time he opened his mouth, sound came, perfectly pitched yet distant, as if piped through someone else's diaphragm. Mid-set, he reached into the breast pocket, felt the crackle of Lisa's paper. Without pausing the patter, he angled toward the piano, slid the drawing under the lid like a secret message, and returned to center stage as the horns blasted the intro to It's Midnight again. Verse 1 landed, verse 2 slipped. The lyric blurred, reordered itself, vanished. Elvis exhaled through his nose, half-smiled, and let the band vamp. Let's park that one, he muttered, tilting his head for the conductor to kill the chart. Nervous laughter rippled through the audience. He segued into Polk Salad Annie, but the swagger felt counterfeit. Sweat collected at his collar. His hands turned cold. Joe watched from the wings, jaw tight. He would later say he had never seen Elvis search the crowd with such naked uncertainty, as if hunting for a face that could pull him out of a riptide. Then came the scheduled gospel segment. Elvis signaled for How Great Thou Art. The string section answered with a reverent swell. Voices of the sweet inspirations hovered soft and sure around him. He began low, almost conversational. O Lord my God, when I in awesome wonder. Verse 1 held steady, richer than rehearsal. Verse 2 soared. The house went silent enough to hear seats creak. And then the final verse approached, the one that always cracked hearts wide. When Christ shall come, with shout of acclamation. He reached, Then sings my soul, and the note blew out like a candle in wind. No warning, no second chance, just silence where a shout should have been. Gasps scattered across the rows. Elvis swallowed, tried again. Nothing. Microseconds stretched. In the orchestra pit, Glenn lifted hands off the keys, letting the chord decay naturally. A spotlight operator hesitated, unsure whether to dim. Elvis lowered the mic. His chest rose and fell once, twice. He bowed his head. To the audience it looked like prayer. To Joe, it looked like surrender. Either way, nobody moved. After several heartbeats, he raised the mic again, but instead of singing, he whispered, raw and uneven. Sometimes the soul's got too much in it to make a sound. He stepped back, nodded to the conductor, and the band eased the song to a gentle instrumental close, strings descending like curtains. Polite applause built, unsure, then blossomed into a standing ovation that felt like an apology for having asked too much. Elvis acknowledged it with a soft wave. The rest of the concert played out trimmed. No medley, no encore. He closed with a brief blues tag, thanked the audience, and left, shoulders rounding the instant the spot cut. Backstage, sweat cooling fast, he leaned against the cinder block wall. The folded drawing pressed against his ribs seemed to radiate heat. Joe approached, eyes wet with worry. "You did fine," Joe began, but Elvis shook his head. "She said if I sang again, I'd be taken away." His voice was low, not frightened, more wondering. Maybe taken doesn't always mean what we think. Joe tried to joke, something about bank accounts and Colonel Parker's heartbeat. But the words died between them. Elvis pushed off the wall, retrieved the paper from the piano, and slipped it into his wallet behind a picture of his mother. He patted Joe's shoulder. "Get the plane warm. We're going home tonight." On the tarmac 2 hours later, a light mist silvered the navigation lamps. From his window seat, Elvis watched Nashville fade into featureless dark, the muffled engines a lullaby too heavy to soothe. He closed his eyes, and for the first time since morning, dreamed without thunder. Only a faint glow, a child's crayon sun rising behind an angel sketched in hurried hope, keeping watch while the night surrendered. The limousine rolled through Graceland's wrought iron gates at 2:17 a.m. The house looked dormant at first glance, columns washed in soft moonlight, rainwater still beading along marble steps, but a solitary lamp burned in the front parlor, amber against the night. Elvis stepped out, dismissal wave to the driver, and paused for a moment beneath the portico. Cool air carried the faint smell of wet magnolia. Somewhere out back, a sprinkler clicked on, misting shrubbery that didn't need watering. He rubbed his eyes, feeling the grime of 1,000 highway miles that hadn't really been traveled, then slipped the key into the lock as quietly as a man returning from a secret. Inside, the silence felt porous, thin enough to tear. He set his overnight bag by the stairs, towing off boots without untying the laces, and let his gaze adjust. The lamp in the parlor illuminated a small figure curled on the velvet sofa. Lisa Marie, still in yesterday's pajamas, fist clutching a sheet of drawing paper like a message she had guarded all night. Her chest rose and fell with deep, unhurried breaths. A half-empty glass of milk stood sentry on the coffee table, skin puckered over its surface. Elvis knelt, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. The house clock ticked, distant and ceremonial. He eased the paper from her fingers, careful not to wake her. This time, the crayon colors were vivid, bold strokes as confident as a 5-year-old could make them. His own shape, halo bright, filled the center, but the dark silhouette from the first drawing was missing. Flanking the glowing outline, hand resting on his shoulder, stood the new white guardian, wings only hinted at, but unmistakable. Lisa had pressed so hard the wax ridges caught the light, giving the angel a texture the other lines lacked. He sank onto the armchair opposite, drawing held loosely in both hands. Nashville's stage lights, the stuttered words, the silent auditorium, they all felt distant, as if someone else had worn his skin for those 90 minutes. The hush of the parlor felt heavier than applause, almost medicinal. He stared at the picture until colors blurred, until he could nearly believe the brightness was real flame, and the hand on his shoulder was warm. A creak overhead suggested a bodyguard making rounds. He waited until footsteps receded. then reached for the old Gibson leaning against the phonograph cabinet. The guitar smelled of rosewood and stale smoke, strings tarnished, tuning slightly off. He didn't correct it. Settling on the rug beside the sofa, back resting against cool wood paneling, he thumbed an open E chord and let it ring into the rafters. No microphone, no monitors, no orchestra, just 6 strings and the hush of a house that had seen better midnights. He began to hum, wordless at first, notes sliding like low river water over loose stones. Melody suggested itself, half amazing grace, half something he'd improvised during army barracks loneliness in Germany. He didn't force lyrics. They would have cheapened the quiet. Instead, he played with dynamics, pulse rising then settling, as if rocking a feverish child. At one point, his voice cracked on a high falsetto, but here it didn't matter. The rug absorbed imperfection. Lisa stirred only once, turning toward the sound, but her lids stayed shut. He watched her breathe, each rise of her chest syncing with the guitar's slow heartbeat. The sight wrapped his throat in a gentle vice. How many halls had he filled for strangers, microphone blazing, while here a single sleeping audience of 1 proved enough? The realization felt both shameful and liberating. He modulated down, fingers brushing a final harmonic that shimmered and vanished. In its wake, the room felt newly defined, proportions truer, air somehow sweeter. He laid the guitar flat, stood, and draped the chenille throw over Lisa's shoulders. The drawing he slid into the inside pocket of his jacket. Fabric already carried the faint crinkle of its predecessor, now tucked in his wallet upstairs. Pair of keepsakes, warning and promise, darkness and light, balanced like pages from a psalm he didn't yet understand. Before switching off the lamp, he looked once more at his daughter's sleeping face. Rain had cleared the air outside. Moonlight found the window pane and, refracted through leaded glass, spilled across the floor in pale ribbons that touched the edge of Lisa's blanket, then his boots, then the doorway, as he stepped out. In the hallway he hesitated, hearing none of the usual post-show ringing in his ears, just the distant hum of the refrigerator and the faint tick of the grandfather clock sharpening the hour. He made for the stairs, mind oddly still. The Nashville engagement, the lost lyric, even the Colonel's inevitable reprimand felt secondary. Footnotes to a quieter story, written in crayon, and kept close to the heart. Upstairs, he slid the new drawing into a leather-bound journal already swollen with napkin scribbles, hotel notepaper, and prayer cards. He dated the page, closed the book, and placed it in the nightstand drawer. The click of wood meeting wood sounded final, like a key turning. 4 years later, that drawer would open under different hands. Priscilla, sorting personal items after the world blurred with headlines, would find 2 drawings folded together, one dark, one bright, pressed between Isaiah 43 and a penciled melody line marked Untitled Private. She would sit on the edge of the unmade bed, dawn leaking through drapes, and realize her daughter's prophecy had never aimed at doom. It had pointed toward a night when a man, lost in his own echo, laid down every costume, sang only for himself, and for a breath or two found peace enough to let the silence answer back. In that parlor at 2:58 a.m., unaware of future grief or legend, Elvis Presley eased the bedroom door shut and lay down beside the empty half of the mattress. Outside, the last cloud slid past the moon. Inside, the house finally slept. But on the nightstand, beneath polished cherry veneer, a child's colored angel kept its vigil.